All right, we are on page 26, and today we're talking about how to write the name of an ionic compound given the formula. So the first thing I want to go over is I want to review a little bit how we did this for covalent compounds earlier in the year and kind of compare and contrast with that. So an example of what we're trying to do here is given the formula Cu3PO4, we got to be able to write the name for that. The name for that, it turns out, is copper 1 phosphate. You're going to learn here in the next 5 minutes or so how I came up with that. So earlier in the year, like I said, we learned how to name covalent compounds. And when we named those, we used prefixes. You guys remember that? So it's like carbon tetrahydride, dinitrogen, tetraoxide. You guys remember that? Yeah. So for this, we don't need to use any prefixes, no monos, dis, tris, etc. So in that regard, it is much simpler. We do have to deal with Roman numerals, and I'm going to give you an example of when and how we use those here in a couple of minutes. All right, moving on. Let's look at our first example on page 26. Okay. So we want to write the name of K2O here. So the first thing we do is identify the cation, which is potassium, and the anion, which is oxide. And I didn't need to memorize those names. I just had to look at my ion list on back of the periodic table there. You guys see what I'm talking about? It gives you the spellings and the names for both of those. And when we look at the cation, this is a key thing here. Why don't you guys locate potassium in your cation list? You see it there in the +1 column? Okay. Do you see a Roman numeral next to it? Okay, so then we don't have to deal with Roman numerals for this one. And now we have our name. It is simply potassium oxide. We just put the name of the cation and the anion together, and that is the name of the compound. No prefixes, just potassium oxide. About as straightforward as it could be. Any questions about that? Okay, the next one is when it gets a little tricky. This next example. So I think in your booklets, I think there's a typo and the R in bromine is capitalized, which is incorrect. It should be a lowercase r. You see what I'm talking about down below? Okay. So we are trying to figure out the name of COBr2. All right. So we look for both the cation, which is CO, and the anion, which is Br, on our ion list. Why don't you guys locate cobalt on your ion list there? Has everybody found it? CO? So hopefully what you noticed there is that cobalt can be found here. That's cobalt 2. And also right here, that is cobalt 3. So that's a little problematic. We don't know which it is. That's the trick here, okay? So let's go back to the example now. Again, I want to remind you, we didn't need to do this for the previous example because there was no Roman numeral. But for this one, we're going to have to figure out which one it is. Cobalt with a +2 charge or cobalt with a +3 charge. So basically what we have is we know that it's going to be cobalt something and bromide. We know that that is going to be the name. We just got to figure out which Roman numeral goes in here. Are we clear on the challenge at this point? So how we do that is we make a T-chart. And we're going to start with the anion, which is bromine. And we know that bromine has a charge of -1. That's the nice thing about the anions is they always have just one possible charge, okay? So we've got 2 bromines, each with a charge of -1. That adds up to -2. So the total negative charge in this compound is 2. Do you guys see how I know that I've got 2 bromines?
Yeah.
Because that's what the formula tells us, right? Okay. So remember, in a compound, the negative and the positive charge always have to cancel each other out. So this means we must have a +2 charge from our cations. You guys see how I got that? Okay. We know from the formula that I've got only 1 cobalt. So if that 1 cobalt has to have a total charge of 2, then what's the charge of the cobalt? 2. You guys see that? So this has got to be a +2 up here, the total 2. And that tells me that I've got cobalt 2 right here in parentheses. And that Roman numeral means, again, that it's the cobalt that has a charge of +2.